What factors do you think he's weighing before making that decision? What does it sound like being at the table on this? And how much longer should he wait?
Well, he's using the threat of military action to try to put pressure and get leverage over Iran to bring them back to the table. The problem is that he often makes threats like this and doesn't follow through. So I think Iran frequently believes that President Trump is bluffing. And so he may be forced to engage in major strikes in order to show Iran that there are consequences for not agreeing to a nuclear deal, for not being reasonable, for not reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which are all stated goals of the Trump administration. But again, Iran seems recalcitrant, and they seem ready to endure whatever pain that President Trump can inflict upon them. So there's no clear strategy for winning this war. And it's very hard to win a war like this just with airstrikes. You need ground troops, especially if your goal is regime change, which at the beginning President Trump talked about regime change. He doesn't talk about it anymore, but without regime change, Iran very well could be stronger, even if we do new major airstrikes.
You know, just this week, the president did threaten to ramp up the strikes on Iran further by knocking out, quote, one bridge or power plant for every shot fired at a ship in the Strait of Hormuz. Right? So a little back and forth. But he refused to answer when asked if that action could actually constitute a war crime. Let's listen to that together.
You're talking about blowing up civilian power plants and bridges. Much of the civilized world would consider that a war crime. Do you?
I won't respond to that question.
All right. I mean, what do you think about his response? And would you consider that a war crime if you were advising?
Well, that's a very tough question. First of all, I'd note that he's made this threat many times that he would hit civilian infrastructure. He's even said he's going to annihilate the civilization of Iran. Doing that would, of course, be a war crime, aiming at trying to get rid of a civilization. Hitting bridges, if they have military value, if they're used to move troops across those bridges, arguably would not be a war crime. But the way he has put it, and in the context he has put it, that it is to punish civilians, that would be a war crime.
You know, a lot of people are watching this back and forth that happened this week on the Hill. Senators grilling Secretary Hegseth this week about why the U.S. is still fighting Iran after he claimed just days into the war that Iran's military had been, quote, obliterated. His words. Let's listen.
Early in the conflict, day 3, you said one of those core objectives was to, quote, destroy the missile threat. And as you restated on day 5, to, quote, obliterate Iran's missiles and drones. Those were clearly and repeatedly stated core objectives of the campaign, which 4 months ago you declared had been completed victoriously with every single objective achieved. Were those objectives achieved 4 months ago?
No one ever stated that every single missile was gone. We never expected they would stop having capabilities to shoot. The question is at scale against an opponent like the United States of America.
All right. So what do you think about his explanation?
Well, this was a very contentious exchange with Senator Ossoff, who was really a bulldog here, asking the same question over and over and over again. I mean, Secretary Hegseth doesn't have great answers because he was, so confident at the beginning of the war. He probably overstated the success of the military action, and now it's very hard for him to match that with what's happening right now. And so Hegseth did the best he could. I don't think Americans would be satisfied by his answers, though.
Interesting. I bet there's going to be more questions coming as well. And the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, I wanted to ask you about this, announced a nuclear deal this week without mentioning any requirement for the Saudis to join the Abraham Accords to normalize relationships with Israel. And then you got Trump, who later said he expects Saudi Arabia to join, and that's despite the kingdom insisting on a path to Palestinian statehood first, which is something that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has rejected. Another piece of sound for you to listen to.
Nobody got out ahead. I mean, I just say that in order to do it, they have to be a member of the Abraham Accords, which have been very successful. But it's time now that they do it. We want them to, it's a two-way street, and we think it's very important for the future of the Middle East. The Abraham Accords have been incredibly successful for the countries, as you know, for the countries in them. And I think it's very important. So, at some point they'll join.
All right. So why do you think that condition was left out? And what do you think will happen to the deal?
Well, I think that it is okay for the U.S. to demand that Saudi Arabia join the Abraham Accords, recognize Israel as part of a deal like this. The problem is that the Trump administration apparently didn't put it in the deal when it was agreed to with Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia has a right to be upset that it's now being added later by President Trump. But this deal also is controversial in and of itself, regardless of the Israel component, because some think that this could enable Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium, move them closer to being able to have their own nuclear weapon. That would be problematic because of the non-proliferation treaty. We don't want more countries, even allies, to have nuclear weapons. Moreover, were Saudi Arabia to have a nuclear weapon, that would give Iran, its foe, very close to it, more of an excuse to develop a nuclear weapon. So then you have a nuclear race in the Middle East, which nobody wants and would not be good for the world.
You know,